Welcome to the Missouri Chess Academy Basics class. I am Tim Campbell. I'm the lead instructor and owner of the Academy. I've been playing chess for more than 50 years. I've been playing tournament chess for more than 30 years, and during that time I won 3 state championships in my skill class. But most importantly, I've been teaching kids and adults for the last 20 years in the basics of chess. All right? I've built a curriculum that allows the student to learn these basics of tournament chess in a manner that is confidence building. Okay, I want you to just grow in confidence with each lesson we have. Okay, I and your instructor are going to be guiding you through a series of level drill games to help you learn these basics. Don't worry about whether you're getting through the drills as fast as someone else. Everyone goes at their own pace. Just remember, every time you play a game of chess, you learn something, and we have fun. Let's talk about the board. This demonstration board shows you what a tournament chessboard looks like. Notice that if a board is set up properly, whenever you sit down and face a board, the lower right-hand corner should always be a light-colored square. If it's a dark-colored square, then the board's set up sideways and the game is going to play all funky. Let's talk about these numbers and letters that are around the edge of the board. On a tournament board, we use these to be able to write our moves down. That language of chess is called algebraic notation. The board letters and numbers give you a coordinate system that allows us to identify what happens in a move. Where the letters and numbers come together, give each square a name. For instance, this is A8. We always use the letter first. This would be E4, and this would be H1, okay? Now, the reason that algebraic notation is important is that in a tournament room, that is how you protect your rights, all right? If you're not writing down your moves, then you don't get a say if a question comes up on your board, okay? But you always want to have that right. More importantly, though, after the tournament's over, after the game is over, you have a record of your game. And that record allows you to go through that game with someone like me or another player or even a chess engine online or something. Allow you to go through and see where you can make your game stronger, all right? And it gives you the ability to study the game. Once you know how to read algebraic chess, you can write it. And once you can do that, you can study lots of different ways through blogs, online videos, books. Just opens up a whole lot of resources for you to use to improve your game, all right? So we'll be using that in this case, all right? With tournament chess, the coordinates also give us the ability to know how to set the board up. White piece is always set up on rules 1 and 2. Black piece is always set up on rules 7 and 8. The king is the most important piece in chess. It's the tallest piece in your set, has this cross on the top, all right? This is the piece we're attacking and the piece we're protecting, all right? When a king sits on the board, it always starts on the opposite color center square. So a white king starts on the dark center square, and the black king starts on the light colored center square, all right? Kings move one square in any direction. They can go up, they can go down, they can go side to side, diagonal in both directions, up and down, all right? But one square at a time. The thing a king can't do is it cannot move into a square that's being attacked by an opposing piece. Okay? Otherwise, it's free to move as it needs to, all right? When the king is under attack, we say it's in check. And when a king is in check, you have 3 moves that you can make. You either capture the attacker, block the attack, or move the king to a square that ends in under attack by an opposing piece. As long as you can do one of those 3 things, the game goes on. But if you can't do one of those 3 things, then the game is over. That's checkmate, all right? If it's ever your turn in the chess game and you can capture the king, that means that your opponent has made a move that put their king in check or moved their king into check, and they're not allowed to do that. So they have to take their last move back and try to fix that problem, right? Now, if a king moves, we would say this king moves to E2. We would write K for king, E2 for the square. Anywhere the king sits on the board, it's going to be in one of 3 boxes we call mating boxes. Okay? These are boxes we have to attack to make checkmate. If a king is in the corner square, now it has 3 possible moves. So the mating box would be the square the king sits on, plus 1, 2, 3 move squares. Attack all 4 squares, you have checkmate. When the king goes on the side of the board, now it's in a side box. The king square it sits on, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible move boxes. This makes a total box of 6 squares. It's a little safer in a side box because there's more to attack, more boxes to attack than in the corner box. Anytime a king is off the edge of the board, now we say it's in the center box. And in the center box, we have the king square plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So a total of 9 squares in the center box. All right. It's safest when it's out here because it's more squares to attack. All right. Anytime when we can attack all the squares in a king's mating box, we're sure to have checkmate. It tells us how much power to bring to the attack and how we need to proceed. All right. Now, early in a chess game, a king is going to move into a side box because it's actually safer there than in the square it starts on. The square it starts on is actually one of the harder squares to defend it. And we're going to move it to a side box where we can free up more of our pieces to attack. Then, as pieces get captured and there's fewer pieces on the board, now we're going to move the king out to the center boxes where it has more freedom to move and it can help with the attack. Plus, your attacker has more squares they have to attack to get it into checkmate. Okay. Let's talk about the rooks. The rooks are your corner pieces. They look like a castle, all right? They can move up or down or across as long as the path is clear, okay? They have a clear path all the way across the board. They can go there in one move. This means they're a long piece, which gives them the ability to attack and defend from afar. Notice that when a rook runs into something that's in its way, it has to either stop, or if it's an opposing piece, it can capture at that point, all right? It has to make a choice. It just can't jump over things. Now, when a rook moves, we write R. This rook moves H2, we're going to write R, H2, all right? Let's talk about the castle move. This is a very special move that both sides get to do once in a game. It's the only time you can move 2 pieces at the same time. It involves the king and the rook. If the space between the king and rook are empty and another piece isn't attacking those spaces, the king isn't in check because we can't use the castle move to get out of check. The king goes 2 squares toward the rook, and it must be the first move for both pieces. So then the rook comes to its side, right? Now, this is called the short castle or the kingside castle. Notice that the rook moved 2 squares from its starting spot. So to write this, we would write 0-0. Now, the reason castling is important is because, like I said earlier, where the king starts out on the board, it takes more pieces to protect it there than it does in a castle formation. So we want to give ourselves the chance to use as many of our pieces as we can in our attack. So we make this move. Most masters and experts try to get this done within the first 10 moves of the game. Also notice the rooks can now see each other. They can work together as a team. A lot of beginning players make the mistake of bringing a rook up on the edge of the board, okay? But they're strongest when they work as a team coming through the center of the board. Because if you move them on the edge of the board, it's much easier for them to get picked off by your opponent, right? Now, you can also go the other direction with a castle, all right? Again, if the space is clear, the squares aren't under attack, and the king isn't in check, and the king and the rook haven't moved yet in the game, now we can move the king 2 squares toward that rook, and then the rook come to its side. Notice this time, the king and the rook moved 1, 2, 3 squares. So we write 0-0-0. It's basically 1 0 for each square that the rook moves in the castle movement. Right? This tells you what side of the board the king castled to. All right. Now, this is called the queenside castle or the long castle. All right. Notice that when I was moving the castle move, I moved the king first. All right. This is because In tournament play, we use a rule called touch move rule, which means if you touch a piece, you got to move it if it has a legal move. And once you let go of that piece, the move is done. That piece can't be changed. Now, if we were to move the rook first in a castle move, your opponent can say, oh, stop, you're done. That's a rook move, and you can't do anything more with it. However, if you move the king first, because it's the only time the king can move 2 squares, the rook has to be allowed to finish the castle move. So always move the king first when you're practicing your castle move. Let's talk about the bishop. The bishop is the pointed piece. It sits 2 squares away from each rook. All right? The bishop moves diagonal as long as the path is clear, which means if it has a clear path going all the way across the board, it can do that in one move. But it makes it a long piece as well as the rook. Notice that you have a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop. The bishops never change color because they're moving diagonal, okay? So as long as you have both bishops on the board, you have the ability to control the whole board. If you lose one of your bishops, you immediately make them weaker, make yourself weaker on half your board. So getting a bishop advantage is a big deal in chess. If we have to lose our bishop, we want to lose it in a trade with the other side's bishop to keep the board power even. All right? If a bishop moves to e2, we would write b, e2. Okay. The queen is the most important piece in chess from an attacking standpoint. It starts on the color right beside the king. Notice that the square color matches the color. Okay? In chess, we have a saying to help us remember that. Queen on her color, all right? The queen can move up and down as far as the path is clear, like a rook. She can go side to side as long as the path is clear. And she can also move diagonal like a bishop, making her the combination of the rook and bishop together. Now, this gives her lots of power, all right? And because of that ability to go all the way across the board in one move, she is the ultimate long piece. When a queen moves, we write Q, D2 if they move to the D2 square. Okay, let's talk about those mating boxes again and how these pieces work together to make checkmates using them. We said a king in the corner has a 4-square corner box, right? So if a bishop sits on H6 and a queen wanders around and gets its way to G7, now the queen, because it can move diagonal, up and down, and across, and can control the square it sits on, is attacking all 4 squares. This is a checkmate. But it's only a checkmate because the bishop's protecting the queen. The king is the only piece in chess that can't capture a protected piece. But if it's unprotected, it can capture it, and the game goes on. Now, in a side box, we had 6 squares in that box. Let's put that bishop on F4. And we'll get our queen on G5. Now, the bishop's protecting. The queen has all these squares under attack, and she's holding her square. This is a checkmate on the side box. But again, only because the bishop's protecting. Take the bishop away, and the king captures, and the game goes on. In the center box, we said there was 9 squares. So now, the bishop sits on G5. The queen sits on F4. She has the square she's on. She attacks those 2 squares to the side. So now we're at 3, 4, 5, and she attacks diagonal. So she has 6 and 7 because you can't run away from a long piece. All right? So she attacks through the king. Problem is she still doesn't have these last 2 squares, right? So in the center box, we need a protector, and we need another piece, like this bishop, to close the back door. So in this way, the mating boxes tell you how much power you have to bring to the checkmate attack. Let's talk about the pawns. The pawns are your front row pieces. They're the shortest pieces in your set, and you have 8 of them. They line the front of your army. They are the only piece in chess that cannot move backwards. They are also the only piece in chess that move differently than they capture, all right? So on its first move, any pawn can move 1 or 2 squares. But once it moves, it can only move one square after that at a time. All right, so if it moves one square on its first turn, it no longer has that option of moving 2 squares ahead. Now, if something gets in front of a pawn, it's stuck. It can't move, all right? It cannot jump, so it's just stuck. But if something gets diagonal to it, and it's diagonal forward, it can capture. And that's the only way it can capture is diagonal forward, all right? So when something's in front of a pawn, if you can't, until that obstacle gets removed, that pawn is just stuck sitting there waiting for something to get into one of its capture squares, all right? Now, if a pawn moves to d4, we would write just the square name, d4. They dropped the P in pawns when we started doing computer notation and such. So one of the pawn's special powers is its ability to turn into another piece. The way this happens is it's called promotion. When a pawn moves across the board, we say it can't move backwards. So what happens is when it gets to the end of the board, it can be turned into a queen, a bishop, a knight, and a rook. We'll talk about knights in a few minutes. Now, because of that power to turn into a queen or a bishop or a knight or a rook, we have to respect where that promotion is going to happen. Sometimes we guard the square where the promotion is going to happen, or sometimes we just make sure that we try to stop that pawn's progress before it gets there, all right? A lot of people have the mistaken impression that you can only turn a pawn into something that's been captured, but that's not true. If you have a queen on the board and you want a second queen, you can have a second queen. In fact, under the rules of chess, if you get all 8 of your pawns across the board, you can turn them all into queens. And if you still have your starting queen, that's 9 queens. That's massive overkill. Long before we get that 9th queen on the board, we're going to have either a checkmate or have a situation where the opposing king isn't in check, but none of its partner pieces have a legal move. And so therefore the game can't proceed. It can't go on. This is called a stalemate draw. Draws are important. They're ties in chess, and they may score a half point for each player in the tournament. Those half points can make the difference between you and your team getting an individual or team award. All right? So we have to respect a pawn moving across the board because of that power. There's one other special power that a pawn has. Let's say an opposing pawn gets 2 rows away from the other side's starting squares, all right? If this pawn moves 1 square, well, we all that the pawn can just capture it, right? So a lot of times people will say, I don't want to get captured, so I'm going to move my pawn 2 squares like I'm allowed to on my first move and pass that capture square. Well, about 200 years ago, the rule makers of chess said, not so fast. And they made a special rule called en passant capture, which says if a pawn passes another pawn's capture square using its 2-move option, on the next move and only the next move, that a pawn can pretend like it only moved 1 square and still capture it, right? It must do it on the very next move. If it doesn't, that pawn's safe to go on its way, right? Now, if the pawn is already there already up 1 square and it moves, and the pawn moves there, now the pawn is just moving out of the capture square, so that doesn't count. So even though they're side by side, because it took 2 moves for this pawn to get to that square, that means it didn't pass the square, pass the attacking square, and so therefore it doesn't count for en passant. Okay, it can also work from the other side. It works for both sides. So let's say this pawn gets 2 squares away from that starting spot. This pawn moves 2 squares forward. Next move, it can do that. Again, it has to be the very next move. This is not a very common move. We don't get to use it a lot in chess, but the last state championship that I won, I actually had 2 games where I could make an en passant capture. One time, I needed to not touch it because it was going to get me set up for checkmate. The other time, I needed to do it in order to get myself positioned for making my checkmate. So the board position helps you decide whether it's the right thing to do or not. But the most important thing is to know you have that right. Okay? Knowing your rules and knowing your options in a board is always going to give you the best chance of finding the best move in a game. Let's talk about the knight. This is the last piece in our set. It goes right next to the rook, right? A lot of times what I will tell kids on how to remember those pieces, your rook is your wall. Your knight likes to sit on top of the rook to sit and see over the field. The bishops like to be next to the king and queen so they can talk, all right? Now, the knight is the only piece in chess that can jump. It moves in an L shape, so it'll go 2 squares in one direction and then turn a corner. That corner square it turns to is the L square. That's where all the knight's action happens. That's where it captures. It doesn't capture anything that it moves over getting there, just what it lands on when it makes its L square. It can go forward in an L. It can go backwards in an L. It can go sideways in an L. And it can go sideways down in an L. Okay? It just can't do diagonal L's. That's not allowed. All right? The knight helps us learn a specific fundamental in chess. When a knight is in the corner square, it has the ability to go to 2 L squares. 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 2. All right? Notice that the square it starts on and the square it lands on are different colors. The knight always changes color every time it moves. Okay? So that's another way you can easily spot the knight squares. Let's put that knight on the side. Now the knight has 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4 L squares. Makes it more powerful on the side than it is in the corner. All right? Now let's put that knight in the center square. If that knight can go 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 6, 1, 2, 7, 1, 2, 8. 8 possible squares that knight can get to when it's in the center. This is true anytime it's in that center 16 square box. All right? Makes it most powerful when it's in the center. And that is the key in chess. The center is where all the action happens. All the pieces are most powerful when they're in the center because they have the most move options. All right? So the first battle for chess is for these center 4 squares. Whoever controls the center controls the game. So sometimes we control it by blowing it open. Sometimes we lock it all up and force all the action to the edge of the board. So it just depends on what your playing style is and what your opponent's allowing you to do with their playing style. All right? So we have an old saying in chess with the knight to help us remember that principle. It says a knight on the rim is grim. It means a knight on the edge of the board isn't as powerful as a knight in the center. When a knight moves, we're going to write N, because we don't want to confuse it with the king. So N, C3 is how we would write that knight move. Okay? Well, now you have the basic rules of chess and some of the basic fundamentals. We're ready to start working on level drill games. All right? Each time you successfully find a technically sound and fundamentally sound checkmate that uses the fewest moves possible in that formation, you're going to be rewarded by being promoted to the next level and getting another piece on the board. All right? If we see an opportunity for you fixing that attack and making your attack stronger and better, we're going to give you a correction move. And in that case, you'll get a chance to redo it and make that attack sharper and more dynamic. All right? Now, again, everyone's going to go through these at a different rate. Don't worry about it. It's not a race. See who can get through it fastest. The key is we want to learn what we can from each level, take as many level attempts as we need to make our best checkmate possible. These are going to be checkmate patterns that you can use in any game when you have a full pieces on the board. Okay? You're going to learn patterns and shapes that will help you become a better chess player. Right now, again, first rule is let's have fun.